Like all millennials, I'm a huge fan of the internet, although I'm not always a fan of the things that are on the internet. For example, I don't like that noise I made into that microphone there. For example, the concept of being dangerous. Not a fan. Let me explain why. Hi, I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. So I just did a version of this podcast a moment ago, actually over the last 10 minutes, and I thought I was going in one direction, but by the end of the podcast, I realized I had really gone in another direction. Originally, I started out with the thinking point that, well, perhaps there is some merit to the idea of being dangerous as popularized by the, men's rights advocates of the world. I was looking for the positives in that mode of thought. And even though I found positives in it, I realized they don't really outweigh the benefits. Full disclosure, I'm not going to side with strictly men's rights advocates or, strictly women's rights advocates in the same way that I don't side strictly with Republicans or Democrats. There are people who have merits on certainly both sides of the argument, people who genuinely are fighting for what they believe in and who have a genuine belief and a genuine beef. But like any movement, any organized movement, it can be used for its own device. It can be used by people for their own devices. And not only that, the people who tend to be the loudest are the people with the most provocative method of communicating. So there is perhaps an argument to be made out there, and I cannot speak strongly to the women's rights side of it, except to say there need to be steps taken that women need to be made equal in society if they are not all, if, at the moment, I would say there is no specific law that makes women unequal. The problem is a lot of private policies, and the problem is a lot of modes of thought that continue to not keep up pace with modern times. And the problem is those modes of thought are now bleeding over into different laws. For example, the overturning of Roe v. Wade for a myriad of reasons, not just the reasons that everybody thinks of. That was a very large public intrusion by the government into medical decisions. Specifically, obviously it affects women the most, but it's not, you're not limited to that. The Supreme Court and the justices did try to say it was limited to just Roe v. Wade, and it was strictly limited to a federal protection on abortion under the Constitution. However, the effect of that decision is to create a path for the federal government to go after all, essentially, medical decisions and to essentially have a hand in medical decisions going forward. Women feel the brunt of that impact in the immediate. Right, so that's whether or not you agree with abortion as a practice for religious or other moral reasons, you can look at that and say, it's a problem that the government can just sort of reach in and say, well, a qualified doctor is no longer allowed to make this decision. It's a medical decision at the end of the day. People don't agree with a lot of things, but we shouldn't have democracy in hospitals, mostly because you don't necessarily want a panel of people being who decides what care is appropriate. You'd rather just qualified medical professionals are making that decision. Not politicians. Anyways, I raise that point to say every position you look at, there are people with level heads who would say we actually have more in common than we have apart, and the issues that we have apart, we should actually be able to work out. People who say men's rights is not about advocating that men need to be above everybody else. And that's a lot of the movement. It's a lot of people saying, well, men really, they're the leaders in society. No, not really. There's many reasons why you don't want a uniform gender running society, and in large part, and it may just be as simple as this, when you're running a society of, in the United States, let's say 330 plus million people, having only essentially one voice at the table doesn't help. Now, some people would say, oh, but you have farmers and everything else at the table. Yeah, sure. Okay, you're representing, let's say you're getting to half representation. Congratulations, you're representing half of the United States population. There's a whole half of the United States population that is unrepresented then. And this was a bit of a rambling diatribe to get to my main point, which is the concept of young men needing to be dangerous but controlled. Dangerous but controlled. It seems to me that dangerous but controlled, or even just simply saying, oh, he's not dangerous, but he has the capacity for danger. Well, if you feel uncomfortable sort of digesting that concept, you should feel uncomfortable digesting that concept. Having the capacity for danger should not be something that's seen as a goal to be strived for. It shouldn't. Why? Because you can be many things. You can be strong, and you can be gentle. And if you have gentleness about you, it is unlikely you have the capacity for danger. The thrust of the idea is you should be able to defend yourself and those you love. Okay. Now, if the idea was phrased that way, that is a concept that I certainly can get behind. Again, this idea of men being able to defend their family from like a wild animal attack, no. And I think that's how we have to frame the idea truly. Because, well, let's look at one of the most dangerous animals that's also generally pretty well controlled. A bear. A bear. Take your pick. Panda, grizzly, black bear, polar, Kodiak. Take your pick. Any single one of those bears is a dangerous animal. Most of the time, a bear doesn't wander around the forest all day saying to itself, oh, I can't wait to fight something. No, actually, generally speaking, bears tend to avoid conflict, except for, mating times, and even then, they're not conflicting. They're not conflicting. They're not fighting because there's really like a choice in the matter. They're fighting because there's a limited number of potential mates, and their evolutionary drive is to procreate the particular type of bear that they are. Generally speaking, bears kind of avoid fights. A bear is dangerous, but controlled. But when they get in a fight, it's still a bear. Now, why do I bring that up as an example of why the dangerous but controlled idea is flawed? Well, we could say a bear is incredibly dangerous, but also incredibly controlled, considering that their body count isn't, thousands every year, because they could really, they could do damage to the population of any country they're in. So do we want to be like bears? No. Human beings should not strive to the mental capacity of a bear. We should strive to be, in terms of there's no animal we should strive to be, because at some level, almost all animals have some amount of, danger but control associated with them. Maybe we should strive to be the sheepdog. Yes, the sheepdog. The noble dog known for shepherding sheep. Why? Well, because quite frankly, a sheepdog looks dangerous, and certainly it will stand up for itself, but it's not really dangerous, right? Like a sheepdog, it herds sheep, okay? But it's not dangerous. It's caring. Most sheepdogs are great with kids. They're gentle. They're kind. And I know that I'm certainly anthropomorphizing the noble sheepdog a little bit, but to get the point across is what I'm saying, is that simply, if you just say you should be dangerous but controlled, well, what you're saying is, well, you should be a bear. You know, going out and wandering the woods and, being the biggest thing in the forest, but choosing not to engage everybody because, you're the biggest, baddest thing out there. That's a sad, lonely life. And on top of that, I don't know about you, I want nothing to do with a bear. Ever. Be the sheepdog. Gentle. Kind. And with enough strength. With the strength that you need. This was a ramble. I've gone over my allotted time. Have a great day. This was 10 Minutes with Nick.